Very good evening, viewers. Welcome to Citti Media. My name is Sharan Citti and I'm your host. In this Vaishali Dialogue, we'll be talking about the CAA NRC because this is one issue that has again catapulted into the limelight, especially with the government conceding defeat over the farm laws. And somehow the protesters seem to have set an agenda and an eye towards CAA NRC, and they have been demanding the withdrawal. But if there is one region in India that has been strongly for the CAA NRC, and there are a lot of fault lines which are becoming invisible in spite of political differences, it's the Northeast. And specifically, Assam has been facing a lot of issues as far as illegal immigration is concerned. And that's what we'll be discussing today with Rami Desai and Dr. Ankita Dutta. Thank you so much, Ramiji and Ankita ji, for joining me today. Namaste, and I hope everything's well.
Yes, it's a privilege again to be here with you, Sharan. Thank you for inviting me.
It's always a
Namaste.
pleasure.
Thank you, Sharanji, for inviting me with such an eminent co-panelist, Rami Desai. It's nice to meet you, ma'am. Thank you.
First of all, let us begin by discussing the history of, say, illegal immigration with Assam, because this has also eventually led India to liberate Bangladesh, because one of the reasons behind it. So, Ramiji, could you summarize why this is such an important agenda for Assam in specific?
All right, I'll try to do my best in giving you a concise background of what really the issue is and historically what its moorings are. You see, Sharon, the unabated influx of illegal migrants from Bangladesh into Assam and the consequent perceptible change in the demographic pattern of the state, has been a matter of great concern, not just since the general public has come to hear of it with the application of the NRC, but for a very long time, since the time of independence, and the reason is because it threatens to reduce the Assamese population, the Assamese people, to a minority in their own state, and this is something that has happened before in Bharat, as we know. So it's not something that is beyond our imagination. Now, illegal migration into Assam is the core issue, and it was the core issue behind the Assam students' movement, which was one of the greatest students' movements in the country.
Right.
It was also one of the prime contributory factors behind the outbreak of insurgency in the state. Yet, even though, Bharat has dealt with all of these issues and it has been in the consciousness of the government, unfortunately, till now, there hadn't been any tangible progress made in addressing these issues. Now, what happens is that there is a tendency to view illegal immigration as only, regional matter, that it only affects Assam. But I think it's really important when we talk about illegal immigration, when we talk about NRCCA, one has to understand the wide ranging implications that it has on the rest of the country and to all the other states, and this really is one of the major factors that undermines our national security today. And this has been a design of Greater East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, making very strategic inroads into Bharat via Assam. You see, you have to view it like you asked, and I hope I'm not taking too much of time, but it's such a complex issue. With the backdrop of the history of the partition, and what their future designs were. Of course, there's been migration into Assam on multiple levels. There
Right.
was during partition, even during when the British were in the region, they brought a lot of people from Bihar and other areas to work in tea gardens. But that is, in my opinion, that is not the population that one needs to be looking at in terms of it being an issue and it having implications on national security, for us. The problem, the issue that we should be looking at is the larger design historically that was there to somehow make Assam a part of Bangladesh via demographic change. And this happened pre-independence as well, uh, uh, while we started moving towards democracy, the Muslim League came up with its demand for partition on the basis of religion. Now, during Sir Muhammad Sadullah's Muslim League ministry, a concerted effort was made to encourage the migration of Bengali Muslims into Assam, again for demographic change. So you see, we have to look at it in the context of history because this was not like a natural migration. This was an effort. There was a viceroy called Lord Wivell who said that the chief political problem, is the desire of the Muslim ministers to increase this immigration into uncultivated government lands.
Right.
Under the slogan of "grow more food." But what they were really after was to grow their own population.
Right.
And you see, we have to understand that even during partition, when this demand was laid, um, there were, it was visualized that Pakistan would comprise of Muslim majority provinces in the west and Bang-e-Islam comprising of Bengal and Assam in the east. And there was a gentleman called Moinul Haq Chaudhry, the private secretary of Jinnah, who after independence became a minister in Assam. And he, even then at that point, told Jinnah that I will present Assam to you on a silver platter. So, these were, this was a design. This was a strategic design. There was an intention to have demographic change.
Right.
There's also an issue that Bangladesh is highly populated, cultivable land is decreasing day by day, Assam is rich in natural resources. All these reasons came together for these people to sort of make this design. And from there, this illegal migration became an issue. And since then, one has been trying to find a solution for it.
It's very interesting that you bring this up, and let me go to Dr. Ankita Dutta with this question. Now, obviously, with the idea of CANRC coming into place, a lot of Assamese have expressed their support. But historically, has there been a resistance to such demographic changes from any individuals or organizations, especially in the form of Hindu groups?
Yes, good question. I think for that, we need to go into the origins of the illegal immigration debate in Assam. Much of it has already been summarized by Rami ji, so I wouldn't like to repeat the historical roots of this problem. Now, since you were talking about the resistance, and I would like to begin by tracing the origins of this illegal immigration debate in Assam. And since it begins from the fact that the Hindus of Assam, in terms of language, food habits, festivals, and surnames, they just have nothing in common with the infiltrators, with the Bengali-speaking Muslims, the Bengali origin immigrant Muslim population, I would say. And these undocumented Bangladeshi migrants, they are largely uneducated. They occupy the lowest rungs of the labor force. Now, since Ramiji was talking about the Assam agitation of 1979, so it was during the Assam movement that the public sentiment in Assam had gravitated from being indifferent or casual about migration from Bangladesh to taking a firm stand on the issue. And talking about organizations, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the RSS in Assam at this time, emerged as a prominent socio-political force in the wake of the Assam movement. And it was from this time onwards that the RSS not only extended its its ideological support base in Assam, but also backed the mass movement, which drew its legitimacy from the objective of preserving and conserving the socio-cultural fabric of Assam and the larger Assamese society, of course. And It was at this time that the RSS openly articulated its stance for and against the Bahiragatas. Bahiragatas referring to those who have come from outside Assam. So the RSS, it first transformed the agitation, that is the Assam movement, from being anti-Bahiragata to being an anti-Videshi or anti-foreigners movement. And in due course of time, the popular opinion in Assam was further directed against the immigrant Bangladeshis and later against the Bangladeshi Muslims. At that time, prominent ideologues of the RSS such as Murli Manohar Joshi, Atal Bihari Vajpayee including, they not only publicly supported the cause of the movement but also boldly presented the concerns and grievances of the Assamese people in various national forums. And this eventually helped the RSS gain a popular foothold in the state in the years to come, which is definitely not to be ignored when we try to analyze the rise to power of the BJP in Assam, and not just in Assam, but across the Northeast. Now, regarding the question of migration, it was in the year 1980, 1980, that after a series of several meetings, the RSS now clearly stated its view that the Hindus were Sharanarthis, that is asylum seekers, and the Muslims were Anupraveshkaris or infiltrators. So by adopting such a stance on the foreigners' dilemma in Assam, the RSS now divided the migrants from Bangladesh into two different camps. The Muslim migrants who had traveled to India in search of better economic opportunities and mainly land, and the Hindu migrants, majority of whom were political refugees. And of course, migration of the Muslim migrants, as we all know, it had been facilitated by the corrupt political establishment with a view to building and harnessing a vote bank in favor of in favor of the protector political party. But on the contrary, the Hindu migrants, since they were a minority in a Muslim-dominated country, they had fled their homes in search of a dignified shelter where they could live and peacefully practice their religion. And gradually, after this movement, the RSS became a rallying point for all those victims of religious persecution whose lands had been forcibly taken away by the Muslims, whose daughters were raped and molested at the hands of the new men in their area, or who were either forced to convert into a new religion or die. So,
right. You know, the two keywords that I take away from what you just said are Bengali Muslims. And Ramiji, I come to you with this question. Now, I was reading Himanta Biswa Sarmaji's interview to Open Magazine, and what he mentions is two particular problems here. One is the language divide, where this is also a linguistic problem with the local Assamese, and also the communal divide, right? Of course, and there are different tangents to this communal divide, because it is also said that the indigenous Muslims of Assam also have a problem with the illegal immigrants coming in, and they're at the receiving end, is what the popular narrative in the media is today.
Sharon, from what I have observed with the time I've lived in Assam, and I've done my research in Assam, one of the things I've understood there, and I think it's important for us to understand this as we are not from the region, is that the Assamese Muslim is very, very different. Their interactions, their relations with Assamese Hindu is extremely, extremely cordial. They are also, I have found, in their way of life, in their living, very, very liberal, very modern, very egalitarian, very secular. And therefore, it makes them very, very different to the Muslims coming in from Bangladesh. Economically, both of them are different. I have noticed some of the Assamese Muslim, Gauriji, please feel free to correct me. You know, you are from the region, and I hold your insights, in very high this thing. But having said that, I find that the Muslims from Assam, in Upper Assam, they were the tea plantation owners. They were well-to-do. They are far more educated. You know, our president Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed, the first Muslim president, came from Assam. You know, so they have held a very different position in society, and I find that would be a clash. There would be a natural clash for them or for an average Assamese, or even for people in Delhi or Bombay or Bangalore, where a lot of this illegal migration is finally moving out to. Assam, for a lot of them, is their first stop, but a lot of them continue moving, more inward into Bharat. And even for us, we would find a cultural shock. Now, you have to understand that Bangladesh, interestingly, one has had has had this idea of Assam being naturally a part of their grand design, even from people who were considered to be friends of Bharat. So, for example, a pro-India leader like Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, in his book Eastern Pakistan, uh, uh, you know, uh, its population and economics, also said, because Eastern Pakistan must have sufficient land for its expansion, and because Assam was abundant in forest and mineral resources, coal, petroleum, Eastern Pakistan must include Assam to be financially and economically strong. So even the pro-India friendly forces believe that Assam should be a part of their grand design. And I think, when the grand design is this insidious, it isn't lost on people. So that clash is natural to happen. Also, what Himantoji says is quite correct, because you see, he's also looking at it from a political point of view. Now, with 40% Muslim population and largely covering areas where, there are areas with 90% now majority, will affect about 80% of the 80% of the seats. So the
One more
minute
statement that he made in the interview was that evictions are not really practical, because at the end of the day you're talking about nearly 1.5 crore people. So what if they start blocking the highways?
of, I mean, is that a question or is that a statement?
No, I'm just supplementing what you said.
No, absolutely. There's anything can happen, and you see these. Like I said, this has implications on national security. Now, blocking highways or blocking roads, or the kind of drama we saw during the CAA protests,
Right.
is only one part of the issue. The larger part of the issue is that these borders are porous. There is a lot of drug peddling. It's actually in the last 6 months under GP Singh, the DG of Law and Order. It is under him that they have caught the largest haul of drugs that were being smuggled into
Right.
Assam, in the history of Assam. While we were all focused on the Aryan Khan case, this government was making great strides in Assam. But why were they making these great strides? Because all of this is interconnected. All of this
Right.
has a larger impact, and of course, there's going to be problems with eviction, and we'll have to wait and see how that is going to happen. We've already seen what has happened in the
Right.
last few months. But I believe that people don't know enough to make an opinion. Remember when that eviction drive happened and it was all over
Yeah.
the newspapers? It was only seen as from a perspective of it being ruthless,
Correct.
but people have to see it in a larger perspective. I remember once wanting to, I had heard that there's illegal immigration in Kaziranga, and Kaziranga is national land, it's not even state land, and there is a huge settlement there. I wanted to go there, and they said, don't even bother. Our security forces, authorities cannot go there. This, of course, I'm talking about 10 years ago when a law and order situation was very different. But this is the kind of threat and fear that you live in, and that you bear coming from illegal immigrants. So it's not as if they are
Yeah.
ideal citizens.
Right. It's very important point that you bring this up, because Dr. Ankita, you've been writing about this in national dailies as well, that the demand for Mia poetry and Mia land in Lower Assam especially has become a very big issue, especially in the wake of the anti-CA protests. So could you tell our viewers more about this and how important of an issue this is?
Yes, yes, good question. Yeah, the demand for establishing a separate genre of Mia poetry, and as well as the demand for a Mia museum or a separate Mia land in Lower Assam. Through these demands, I would say all those dubious citizens residing in Assam who may have been feeling threatened in the wake of the CAA, they immediately took recourse to proclaiming a separate Mia identity, which they seek to establish in the underbelly of Assam. And several armchair intellectuals based in India and abroad have glorified this Mia identity, especially in the wake of a candidate from the AIUDF, Ashraful Hussain, and his electoral victory from the Senga constituency of Borpeta district in Lower Assam. It is as if this elite coterie of intellectuals seems to have been delighted by the emergence and acceptance of this identity by the immigrant Muslim population in Assam. Now, the assertion and adaptation of this particular moniker, Mia, by this community, especially in the context of the anti-CAA protests in Assam, and prior to the Legislative Assembly elections of 2020, was aimed to provide a new lease of life, I would say, to the thought process of Do Qaumi Nazariya that was espoused and propagated by the Muslim League and Muhammad Ali Jinnah in 20th century British India. We all know what happened eventually, the creation of Pakistan and all of that. Now, by defaming the larger Assamese society as xenophobic at both the national and international levels, the glorification of a separate Mia identity by the immigrant Bengali-speaking Muslims of Assam is nothing but a reinvention of Jinnah's two-nation theory, because a separate branch of Mia poetry or Mia language in itself, doesn't it contain the seeds of separate nationhood that proudly disown India and Indian identity? Okay, well, now coming to the word Mia, it is a colloquial form of address that is used by most common men and women in Assam to designate the Bengali-speaking Muslim community. It is a quite commonplace reference that is used to describe their language, their food habits, their culture, which are very different from the Assamese community. So, the fact that there, of course, exists a genuine reason behind the prevalence of this discontent in Assam since the days of the Assam agitation, and this can no longer be overlooked by the political establishment and as well as the academic fraternity. Many areas in Lower Assam, where most of these so-called immigrants are concentrated, they are contiguous to the international boundary with Bangladesh. Between 2001 to 2011, the Muslim population in Assam rose considerably. There were six Muslim dominated districts in Assam in 2001. It increased to 9 in 2011. Now, here I would like to quote a newspaper report that was published way back on September 17, 2010 in the Deccan Herald, which reported that more than 7,000 bighas of land belonging to 39 satras of Assam in Dhubri, Borpeta, Nagaon, and Morigaon, they are in the grip of illegal encroachers of suspicious nationality. Also, as per the HS Brahma Committee report, the Brahma Committee report said that this number is far higher, and it had clearly mentioned that the identity of as many as 18 satras in Assam is under threat, most of them concentrated in Lower Assam, because of large-scale land encroachment by illegal Bangladeshi migrants. Now, these might sound like politically incorrect concerns, or they are even like academically suicidal to talk about. But certain genuine questions need to be asked, because are these figures just a mere Hindu-Muslim concern? Or, it's a concern, something which is bigger, a concern of illegal infiltration from across the border. There is the fear of becoming an alien in one's own land that has more to do with culture than religion. And there has been a continuous disappearance of non-Muslim ethnic subgroups from these districts in Lower Assam. It is shocking. Like, for example, till almost the early 1920s, Dhubri district of Lower Assam, which is now Badruddin Ajmal's constituency, it was a Hindu majority area, and 80% of the population in Dhubri town was that of Hindus in the early 1920s. It was a part of the Koch Rajbangshi kingdom of present-day Koch Bihar in West Bengal. But at present, the Rajbangshis, they account for only 11% of the electorate of Dhubri district. And as per the 2011 census, 2021 is not out yet, Muslims constituted almost 80% of the population in the district. So these are, of course, genuine questions that no longer can be brushed off as merely Hindu-Muslim concerns. It is a concern of illegal infiltration from across the border and the abnormally increasing population growth rate of the Muslims, the rapid mushrooming of masjids in these areas, and most importantly, the changing patterns of crime and criminal activities like rapes and molestations, drug smuggling, as Rami ji has said, etc. So in such a situation, the assertion of a separate Mia identity, it not only serves as a precursor to Jinnah's two-nation theory, but also provides fuel, I would say, to the increasing Arabization of the Muslim population in general in Assam.
May I also supplement this? You made some.
I was just okay. And apart from that, can you also tell us, Ramiji, about what the options with the government are? Because if the situation is so volatile on the ground, then what are the options left for the government to do?
Okay, I'll come to that. I just wanted to add to what my co-panelist has put very articulately, is also the issue which is now cropping up of land jihad. We've all heard of love jihad, but land jihad is becoming an issue that needs some amount of scrutiny, because a lot of land that is set aside for tribal populations, there is a targeted intermarriage happening between these illegal immigrations and girls from these areas. And obviously then their children who do inherit this land, the question that then comes up is, what are they being raised as? Are they being raised in the tribal culture? Are they being raised, in the Muslim culture? So these are issues that have not even come up to light and are already creating larger fault lines than there may be. And also, as my co-panelist said about the demographic change, one of the most shocking demographic changes that I found was that in 2001, the Muslim population was approximately 30%. In 2021, it's 40%. These are huge jumps. How do these jumps happen? There has to be population coming in from somewhere else. So for all the naysayers who say that, oh, this is not illegal immigration, or, who make excuses for this change that is happening, A, need to understand that this was a design historically, and B, they need to understand the implications of demographic change and what it does to societies. Having said that, coming to your question about what can be done in the future. Now, this is a really important question. It is also a very difficult question to answer, because we pretty much know what can be done. But it's difficult to do so. So, for example, border fencing. Border fencing may be a foolproof method of preventing infiltration. May not be a foolproof method, but there isn't a better method, and for border fencing to be effective, it has to be supplemented by other efforts as well, like vigorous patrolling of these areas, more border security forces being deployed into these areas. And, if this can be done, this is partly a solution to the problem, but not a whole solution. Border policing, and border policing and sort of having focus on the movement of smugglers, militants, infiltrators, is really, really important. But you see, Assam, even compared to, let's say, Punjab, has a much bigger and more dangerous dimension to it. So the measures to counter trans-border movement in Assam unfortunately, have been given a lower priority than it was given in Punjab is because of our government's previous dispensations policies towards the region
Right.
as a whole, not just towards Assam. But having said that, apart from that, even though areas like Jammu and Kashmir and Punjab have always been given a lot more importance, a lot more media coverage, people talk about it a lot more, people are concerned about it a lot more. The issue remains that the Northeast region and Assam, being one of the gateways to the Northeast region, is in a far more precarious position than any of these other states.
Right.
So I think it's really important that we look at our border fencing, we look at our border patrolling, we look at deployment of more forces on these areas. Also, I think we need to issue multi-purpose photo identity cards. There
Right.
is no way to go beyond it. There needs to be identification. Many countries have it. I don't understand the problem with us having it. Yes, the exercise of it is not going to be foolproof. The exercise of it is not going to be exact. But that doesn't mean you don't attempt the exercise.
Right.
You have to have remedial measures
Yeah.
where you have tribunals and you have special courts where you can go and appeal if
Right.
there is an issue. Nobody is picking you up from your
So
house and
these
throwing
are
you.
practical, preventive, and corrective measures which can perhaps address the root of the issues here. But on the other hand, you have the opposition, which has been amplified in the media with Mia poetry and campaigns like "Kagaz Nahi Dikhayenge," somehow becoming a symbol for the anti-CA protests. And the logic is so dumbfound that there is so much of implications on this, especially from a security angle as well, that people do not fail to understand. And I'm really glad you bring this up because Dr. Ankita Datta, my next question to you is now forget the media amplification of what the agenda is, but on the ground, what are the people demanding and what is the politics around it as far as these political parties are concerned?
Yes. Yeah. So, in this context, I think what we need to understand is the fact that the massive and spontaneous protests against the CAA in Assam. It was fueled by the anxiety of the people of Assam with respect to their linguistic, cultural, and political marginalization, as well as apprehensions regarding the stress on the fragile ecology of the state due to further demographic change which cannot be borne by them any longer. Because Assam is a state, we need to understand this with some very very genuine and deep rooted demographic fears, and hence the volatile situation over the CAA, I would say, it still has the potentials of escalating into a new cycle of violence if the government does not tread with caution and address the real concerns and grievances of the Assamese community over this legislation. But at the same time, I think it would not be correct to say that the entire Assamese society is opposed to the CAA as the left inspired media narrative would like us to believe, because the fact that the BJP won 9 seats from Assam out of 14 in the 2019 general elections and also performed very well in the 2021 legislative assembly elections, especially from Upper Assam, which was the primary center of the anti-CAA protests, despite having the CAA as one of its core agendas in the election manifesto. I think this is proof enough of this fact. And the BJP also won a huge victory, not only from those areas where the Bengali Hindus are in a majority, but also it comfortably won from all those seats where the Assamese speaking community constitutes the majority, such as Lokhimpur, Dibrugarh, Naharkotia, Tezpur, etc. And several sections of the Assamese society who took an active part in the anti-CA protests, they were deeply disappointed by the fact that, I mean, the people with whom I have interacted, they took an active part in the anti-CA protests, and they were deeply disappointed by the fact that only 19 lakh people were declared as illegal immigrants through the NRC process. This was because they expected and wanted this number to be much higher,
Right.
and fearing that they would be linguistically and culturally outnumbered in their own state, this section of the people in Assam is averse to granting citizenship rights to Bengali Hindus who fled Bangladesh on whatever grounds. Now, they want total exclusion of illegal migrants, irrespective of religion. And according to them, the BJP is attempting to make Assam a dumping ground for illegal Bengali Hindus through the CAA. Now, so the initial protests against this legislation in Assam, they were primarily centered around this concern. Now, coming to the issue of an updated error-free NRC in Assam, here I would like to mention about somebody called Pradeep Bhuiya, who was closely associated with the NRC updation exercise in the Supreme Court of India, and who has repeatedly said earlier that the population of Muslims in Assam, as projected in the census data, it bears no correlation with the data in the electoral rolls. And this is true. These allegations can be easily confirmed by a statistical analysis of electoral data. Like, for example, during 1981 to 2011, the overall average growth rate in the population of Assam was 20.07%, which was much below the national average of 21.03% during the same period. But the increase in the number of voters as per periodic revision of electoral rolls during the same period of 1981 to 2011, it was 35%. So these are suspiciously huge numbers, as can be seen from the electoral rolls, which are because the electoral rolls are far more important for the ruling party in power than the decadal census. And the corrupt bureaucrat politician nexus, it has been very, very adept at exploiting the legal loopholes to include the names of individuals of suspicious nationality in the voters list during the periodic revision of electoral rolls. And I would say at last that there has been a continuous tendency, as we all know, on the part of a certain section of the Assamese intelligentsia to portray the NRC, the National Register of Citizens, as an exercise of disenfranchising the Muslim population of Assam and making them stateless and whatnot, by declaring a vast majority of them as illegals and non-citizens. So just like Mia poetry and the demand for a separate Mia museum, the NRC too has been made use of as an excuse to play the politics of Muslim victimhood, which is a completely one-sided and hypocritical narrative that has quite comfortably brushed aside the truth that it is only citizenship and not religion. It is only citizenship and not religion that forms the basis of inclusion and exclusion of names in the NRC. So I think it is a very delicate situation, and there is a significant possibility of the state witnessing a three-way conflict between the Assamese, the Bengali Hindus, and the Bengali Muslims if the real concerns regarding what I said over language and resources, over the CAA of the people of Assam, are not addressed by the government.
Thank you so much for that elaborate introduction to what the issue on the ground is. Unfortunately, we are running short on time, so I'll have to conclude right here. But we will have another session on this very soon, since this seems to be such a pertinent issue to Assam and to the entire country itself. But thank you so much. This is perhaps one of the few exclusive debates on CAA and NRC pertaining to Assam is concerned. And both of you ladies have given us extremely good insights into the issue. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste, and viewers, please do let us know what you thought about this panel, and if you have any thoughts for our panelists today. Until then, this is your host, Sharan Citti, signing off.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. धन्यवाद. नमस्कार.